Governor Rauner has been using a lot of pens lately, approving some bills but vetoing others. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state issues, sometimes federal issues, and how they just might affect your life. I'm Bernie Schoenburg from the State Journal-Register. A lot of action from the governor's fingers. He's using his pens, as I was saying earlier. Here with me today to talk about what's going on in state government and politics, mostly. Brian Mackey is here, State House reporter for NPR Illinois, also known as WUIS. Welcome back.
Good to be with you, Bernie.
And you guys work together. Daisy Contreras, reporter, NPR Illinois. Welcome, Daisy.
Thanks, Bernie.
And so one of the things that we have noticed that the governor used his pens on, he signed a couple of immigration bills and he vetoed 3 others. He actually talked, it's been about, it was a week ago Friday, that the governor was on a station, WJPF in Southern Illinois. They call it the Voice of Southern Illinois, and he talked about these bad immigration bills that the Democrats sent him. Daisy, give us a little rundown on where things are.
Yeah, so these 3 immigration bills, advocates throughout session were pushing to get the governor to sign these. And like you said, Bernie, in the morning, Friday, a week ago, he appeared as a guest on at this radio station and said he was going to veto these 3 bills, calling them bad plans. Advocates mobilized throughout the day Friday, calling him out on that. Weird, because a year ago, Governor Rauner actually signed a piece of legislation that many other Republicans called him out on because they claim it would make Illinois a sanctuary state.
Right, that's the Trust Act.
Yes, that's the Trust Act. So, which would allow local law enforcement officers, or not allow them, to detain a person solely based on their immigration status.
Right.
And so the governor has talked about how the bill would allow victims of crime to come forward and cooperate with law enforcement. So these 3 bills, one of the bills that he vetoed last week would have helped victims of crime. A lot of these people could be victims of trafficking, for example. So advocates are not sure why he would have vetoed.
Yeah, this is the one that would make local law enforcement kind of put a time limit, say within 90 days you have to file immigration papers for a visa so this person can stay here and fight this crime that has happened to them, or testify, right?
Yeah, so I mean, there was a lot of question as to why people have weighed in. Governor Rauner needs votes from downstate Illinois in order to be reelected in November, and I think that he's trying to appeal to those voters.
Yeah,
more so now.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, Brian, as you all know, when Jeannie Ives ran against Governor Rauner, and she, of course, is a conservative state representative from Wheaton who took him on in the primary and came within 3 points, which was a surprise for a sitting governor. One of the things she said is the governor signed this Trust Act, which keeps local law enforcement from being too forward in helping immigration officials based on your status. She said he's left his conservative principles to the side, therefore, made Illinois a sanctuary state. He vociferously denies that makes Illinois a sanctuary state. But have you seen a change in him?
I mean, yes, I think that it's clear that, he only won that primary against her by 3 percentage points. She threw the word around, as you said, sanctuary, even though he and the Democrats and a number of police officials who are generally not thought of as liberal individuals, endorse this approach. And so now we see him sort of tacking to the right, I think, because although in Illinois traditionally you would expect a governor, or particularly a Republican governor, to take a more moderate approach for the general election, I think that he sees that his path to victory as getting as many Republicans out to the polls as possible. So, and he also has a conservative party, a nominally, I guess, conservative party challenger in State Senator Sam McCann, who until earlier this year had been a Republican, but still a thorn in the side of the governor. They'd clashed a lot in the past. And McCann has picked up with his rhetoric right where State Representative Ives left off in the Republican primary. And although he is at odds with the governor on a lot of issues. He is to the right of him on a lot of social issues, and so he is going to continue needling the governor, I'm sure, in this area.
Yeah, and of course, the main competition for the governor in the November election is J.B. Pritzker. I believe he decried these vetoes that the governor issued, saying, we should be a welcoming state and the governor is wrong, and of course going along with what he believes is the trend in Illinois of a blue state, Daisy. So
right. I mean, and even if you remember last year when Governor Rauner signed the Trust Act, he claimed and he said that he was very pro-immigration and had very thoughts on comprehensive immigration reform for and he's believed this his entire life, and now we get a very different Governor Rauner on immigration.
Well, interestingly, and I did, write a column on this issue this last week, but Patty Hsu, main spokesperson for Governor Rauner, did reiterate. He says he's pro comprehensive immigration reform is legal immigration, and he's opposed to illegal immigration. But clearly, in his comments, particularly on the Southern Illinois station, he's making that more clear that illegal is wrong. And even a year ago, I don't think he would have said illegal is right, but he did. Interestingly, even the state police director spoke when the governor signed the Trust Act, saying police organization, and I believe the Organization of Chiefs of Police, the association, they were in favor of the Trust Act because it would allow victims of crime or witnesses to crime come forward and help local police and not fear that they will be reported to immigration officials and deported. Whereas, so that was an issue where it was helping people who were even here not legally undocumented. Whereas he really took off when he spoke to the Southern Illinois radio station about, we need illegal immigration is bad. We have too many of these people, and they're taking away our Americans' jobs and lowering wages. So it was kind of a different tilt to things as we go. On to another issue on teachers and teachers' unions are certainly an interesting issue always with Governor Rauner, who loves teachers and schools, and there's actually a charter school in Chicago named for him. And yet he doesn't like the Chicago Teachers Union or other teachers unions. And one bill that the legislature passed would, over a number of years, raise the minimum wage for teachers in public schools to $40,000. The governor vetoed it, saying, despite the fact that people like Andy Manar, state senator, said this would be a good way to fill the gaps left by a teacher shortage. The governor says it's a mandate, particularly on smaller school districts. There are other ways to find good teachers, and this is not the way to go. So he vetoed that bill.
He did. I think not super surprised by this. The governor is not a fan of what he calls mandates. He doesn't like to see restrictions on local school districts. Part of one of his big agenda items has been to undo some of the things that school districts have to do in terms of bargaining for wages and benefits with teacher unions. One of the animating events that propelled him to run for office was in fact the Chicago teachers strike of 2012, where he criticized Mayor Emanuel for what he thought at the time was caving to the teachers union. This is of course the day he was making that famous panel appearance. Bernie, you and I have both written about this in the past, where he outlined his plan to use social justice spending as a wedge issue to divide the Democrats against labor unions. So I don't think this is particularly surprising. Also not surprising is that the Democrats are trying to use this to portray him as Governor Veto and as part of their broader picture and anti-teacher. So I don't think we'll have heard of the last of this bill, like a lot of bills.
All right. Well, that one moves on. Again, some of these things that we're talking about, there could be override motions, but interestingly, the legislature is not scheduled to be back in session until after the November 6th election. So if that happens, we don't know if the governor will be looking at the coming second term of the Rauner administration, or if J.B. Pritzker will be kind of waiting in the wings and seeing where things go. And of course, there's Sam McCann and the Conservative Party candidate, and Cash Jackson, the Libertarian candidate. They are at 6% and 4% in a recent poll. That would be Jackson and McCann. But of course, they always would talk about their hope to win. Another veto was health advocates in particular had wanted to raise the age to purchase tobacco products in Illinois to 21. The governor vetoed that, saying it would hurt business. President Cullerton of the Senate from Chicago, John Cullerton, and other advocates had a press conference at the State House where they talked about the need to override that. They think the governor is wrong and we should lead other states, but the governor was using the argument, this really won't help health. Kids will get cigarettes anyway, and people will just go over state lines to buy their products.
Yeah, I mean, advocates are criticizing the governor over, taking the side of business over the children who, buy cigarettes. And like you said, Bernie, Rauner claims that it's not going to change anything, any of the health issues that we're having right now with smoking, and that kids will go over state lines to purchase these, and that it will hurt businesses in the long run here in
We've heard
Illinois.
arguments like this over a long period of time, like anytime there are restrictions put on what Illinois business can do. So again, Brian, I think you'd say this is not out of character for Governor Rauner, who's a very pro-business in orientation. Everything's a lot of talk of job creators and businesses and lack, the need for less regulation.
Yeah, no, and I think there is also the argument that you often hear with these sorts of things about somebody's old enough to serve in the military and be deployed overseas and potentially wounded or killed for our country. They ought to be, we ought to judge them old enough to make a decision about whether they're going to buy tobacco products as well. But it is a big public health problem, and what Senate President Cullerton says is this is not so much about the 19 to 21-year-olds or 20-year-olds who would be newly barred, but it's about younger people buying it for even younger kids and passing the tobacco down.
So
and
the
you're trying to
18-year-old
create a
going to the
more
store.
virtuous sort of trickle-down effect, if you will, in terms of preventing smoking from a younger age.
One of the other controversial vetoes that the governor issued it involved the Illinois Court of Claims. It's if you have a civil claim against the state and you got injured on state property or something, you don't go to a regular court. Often, generally speaking, there's a court of claims set up for this. But as we found out, as we've had, I think it's 14 people now that died of Legionnaire's disease at the Quincy Veterans Home. WBEZ in Chicago initially kind of did reporting on this in the last year, and it did come out that several families, I think it was 10 or 11, had sued, but the maximum you can get from the Illinois Court of Claims for a claim, even for the loss of life, if there was negligence or a problem, is $100,000. So the legislature, and this has become a big issue because the Pritzker people talk about, the fatal mismanagement from the Rauner administration. And the Rauner administration says we did everything the CDC and others told us to do. So and the governor has stayed several nights at the facility to show that he's with the veterans and cares. But the legislature passed a bill that would raise from $100,000 cap in damages to $2 million. And the governor came out this last week and with an mandatory veto, or was it a mandatory veto or at least a recommendation that he recommends $300,000 be the cap. So again, there was some outrage from others, and where are we at with this? Well, I think we'll see the legislature maybe act on this again in the fall.
This seems like something that would not surprise me if we saw action on. It's a big issue for a lot of lawmakers. There are a lot of veterans who've made this a priority of theirs in the legislature, and other people who just style themselves as advocates for veterans. And I think there was wide agreement that $100,000 is probably an amount that needed to be raised upward, particularly for cases involving death.
It sounds like a lot, but when you talk about
sounds like a lot if you slip on the ice and break your wrist or something like that. It certainly would probably be enough to cover medical bills and pain and suffering. But yeah, if you're talking about the death of a loved one, typically I think you would expect to see a higher amount than that in a regular civil courtroom.
Right.
But as you pointed out, because of ancient customs and laws regarding state sovereignty, you can't actually sue the state in court. You have to go to the special court of claims. And so I think there is broad agreement that $100,000 was too low. Was $2 million too high? We heard the Trial Lawyers Association, which represents these are lawyers who represent people in accident injury cases.
Injury claims,
we heard them weigh in, and so I think that will maybe pique the interest of some people who maybe had not had thought of it through the Quincy lens and not through the lens of all the other cases of somebody slipping on the ice at a state park or something like that. But it seems like maybe it will come out somewhere less than $2 million, but still more than $100,000. Or I'm sure, there are some lawmakers who would like to just override the governor outright and go with the full $2 million amount.
Right. And he, of course, was talking about how this could be a potential financial liability to a state that is in dire need of money and is, billions behind in paying bills, despite the fact that we've got a tax increase that's still there, and there's, they at least have a budget now, but there's still a backlog, and they borrowed billions of dollars too, which has to be paid off.
I mean, and then there's also that question of, the issue of the Quincy Veterans Home and the issue, how it's affected Rauner and if it will affect the governor for re-election. It's something that Pritzker has used numerous times, and a lot of other lawmakers as well, in the way that the Rauner administration acted or did not act.
Right. Well, this is definitely going to be an issue. Yeah.
Well, I say in Pritzker, I mean, he is making this an issue in as many ways as he can. I mean, he proposed debates initially, not Springfield, the capital of Illinois, not Peoria, one of the most populous downstates metropolitan areas, and not Metro East, which is the most populous area of Illinois outside of Chicago. No, he proposed having the debate in Quincy, which is a relatively small town, but obviously has residents because of this ongoing
and of course, the legislature
issue.
did in the new budget pass like more than $50 million to start the process of moving residents out and building a new building so that they can fix the water problem that the governor says is kind of an intractable thing when your facility is more than 100 years old. So it's a difficult situation. Daisy, the governor did sign some bills. We don't want to, just because Pritzker says he's governor, no, we don't want to necessarily go along with the campaign. Among things he signed is use of marijuana to replace opioids for pain. And that's a bit of a shift for the governor, because he hasn't been tremendously anxious to allow more categories of users to use medical marijuana. But he did say, in this case at least, temporary use for people who have been on opioids. If their doctors prescribe, they can get medical marijuana. Right,
exactly. And this is kind of like a little bit of a shift for Rauner, like you said. And he still maintains that recreational marijuana for him, it's not something that he would approve of right now. But yeah, if you're being treated for a condition and have been prescribed opioids, you can get medical marijuana instead of the opioids without having to get the certificate that you would normally get. You still have to apply for it.
Right, but you don't need fingerprinting for this, which in earlier iterations of the law, which is really still a pilot project phase with dispensaries in various cities, including Springfield. But you've had to get fingerprinted and a background check, and I think this temporary use with the doctor's permission, if your doctor is willing to prescribe, which I don't think all are yet, but you don't need the fingerprints. So it's cutting away some red tape and moving in a direction more like some other states, but I'm not sure. We're certainly not Colorado yet.
No, although there are legislators who want to take us there, but the governor has been very resistant to that. So as you said, this is a fairly significant change for him. He has resisted a lot of even the implementation of this. He was accused of dragging his feet, or his agency, having his agencies drag their feet on implementing this early on. But this has been a change. Yeah,
well, and clearly this is another issue as the election approaches. J.B. Pritzker has been very forward in saying for financial, but also for, I think he talks about it in criminal justice reasons as well. He would like marijuana to be legalized for recreational use in Illinois, which is clearly different from where Governor Rauner is. And there are concerns about traffic safety, but Pritzker's concern is also that more people of color tend to be charged with crimes involving illegal marijuana than others. So that's another part of the mix. I'm not sure where Illinois goes, but as people go to vote in November, that's one of the issues that they have.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the example you often hear in Chicago is, a lot of 20-year-olds use marijuana, but if you're a Northwestern student using it at a fraternity party versus in, one of the neighborhoods in Chicago, you're going to be, and a person of color, you're going to be treated very differently by the law enforcement. Your odds of being arrested are much greater if you are not in that privileged class of,
that's
college students.
Yeah. So it's an ongoing discussion that we've heard for a long time in Illinois and across the country, and obviously some states have now have legalized marijuana. We'll see where Illinois goes, because we're often not on the cutting edge of such progressive things. On the other hand, the state is trending blue, and we'll see what happens again with the election and where that goes. One of the other bills the governor signed would allow the farmers to produce hemp, which is a marijuana-related product, but I think that it has to be tested so it doesn't have too much of the active ingredient in marijuana that smells funny when it burns. THC. The THC,
yeah.
And I'm not sure if that's really the smell or not. But this again shows part of the shift that Governor Rauner is doing something that perhaps is good for the agricultural community and may not exactly fit where he was in the past.
I mean, there has been some resistance over the last several years to legalize industrial hemp in the state after 2015, that President Barack Obama kind of allowed states to do that on their own. And Rauner argued that this would be a really good idea to help farmers, and if they want another option for another crop. And like you said, Bernie, earlier, there will be some type of regulation. Regulators will establish some rules to measure the levels of THC and make sure in testing, and so that they're able to grow it okay.
Brian, well, thank you, Daisy. Brian, I think you were up late, I'm told, doing a story that 7 minutes on the radio sounds like a little unless you're a radio person. Then you know how long it takes to put together a 7-minute story. But you did a story this week about a recent study by the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute, Southern Illinois University. A lot of attention has come to this story, and it's about which section of the state gets the benefit of state dollars, because you hear so many people, including the governor, often talks about we're just, you don't want your dollars going to bail out Chicago, support the Chicago machine. So there's a political side to that, and there's a fiscal side to that. But
and it's so much better than that, even because I happen to live in State Representative Sue Scherer's district, and when she was running for the first time, and all her mailers were paid for by House Speaker Michael Madigan, D. Chicago,
right,
of course.
Because she's a Democrat from Decatur.
She's a Democrat who was getting support from him. And I remember one of the mailers had this beautiful picture of the Chicago River, the bridges, and it said, "Chicago, a nice place to visit." And you flip it over, not a nice place to send our tax dollars. So even Democrats right, supported by Madigan are using right, this message because it's effective. And what this study pointed out is that it's actually the opposite. It turns out people in Cook County get less back from the state. For every dollar they pay in taxes, they get 90 cents back. In the collar counties, which are some of the wealthiest areas of Illinois, it's even less. It's almost half a dollar for every dollar they pay in taxes, whereas in central Illinois, you're getting well more than $1 back for every dollar you pay in taxes, and it's over $2 in far southern Illinois. And in fact, John Jackson, the emeritus professor of political science at Southern Illinois University and the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute, which put this study out, said that were it not for state government in Southern Illinois in the form of universities, community colleges, prisons, other facilities, there would be far less economic activity, almost no economic activity, he argued, in Southern Illinois, in some places where, right, particularly prison towns, university towns, that if you count not just the spending the institution does, but what those employees spend at grocery stores and gas stations and things like that, that is really a huge driver of the economy in Southern Illinois.
Okay. Believable statistics, and does it do anything? Are the statistics believable? Has everybody been wrong for all these years? And will this change the way regionalism tends to be an issue? As long as I've been doing this for 40 years, regionalism has always been an issue where people downstate say, oh, I don't want those Chicago people. The famous Mike Royko of the Sun-Times and then Tribune, used to make fun of downstate as a bunch of rubes, south of I-80, let's just build a fence. See, maybe that's where this other guy got the idea. Anyway.
I think will it change anything? No, because a politician would be pretty unusual and rare to let a fact get in the way of a good political argument. But it does, I think, should it change something? Well, yes, that would be nice. What I think is interesting from an analytical standpoint is this shows yet again the way in which voters just do not understand how state government works, and particularly the state budget. And this, in my interview with John Jackson, I related back to some earlier work he'd done during the budget impasse. He had asked people, how should we fix the budget problems in Illinois, right? You can raise taxes, you can cut programs, or you can do both. Well, everybody wants to cut programs. That's the most popular item, except when you actually list the things state government does. Should we cut higher education? No. Elementary education, no.
All the things that
All
are
the
there.
things that government
Right.
does.
Roads,
Nobody wants to
which
cut
is, by the way, a
anything.
lot of Southern
Roads,
Illinois
yes,
gets road money
exactly.
because it's so expansive, and there's more highways that
Right.
that state highways.
And so this is just yet another data point in a long sort of series of work that shows that politicians are actually responding to what voters want. Voters want stuff, they want projects, they want highways, prisons, they want good universities, and they want low taxes. And so what we're doing is essentially putting the bill off on younger generations.
Okay. Speaking of taxes, and I'll make it probably our last discussion here today, but J.B. Pritzker has, in his campaign, consistently said he wants Illinois to do a constitutional amendment because we have a flat tax, and to go to a graduated income tax, you need a constitutional amendment so that higher income people, the way he puts it in an ad like me and Bruce Rauner, would pay more and middle class would pay less. Republicans, supported by Governor Rauner's campaign, have had a couple of events already. Leader Bill Brady of the Senate and Jim Durkin of the House up near Chicago, Evelyn Sanguinetti, the Lieutenant Governor over in Peoria, saying, J.B. Pritzker wants to raise your taxes. It'll affect everyone, and watch out for that. Don't believe when he says, because he won't tell us what rates he wants. Don't believe you won't be affected. And so this is a key of the governor's campaign and Republicans' campaign to say, watch out for taxes from Pritzker. Pritzker saying, oh no, that's not true. I don't want to tax the middle class higher or lower income people, but he's not giving the rates, perhaps fearing that the governor will, use whatever top rate he uses and advertise on it. So where do we go from here? Should Pritzker? We're not the advisors, but this is where we are today.
I mean, I think media has been pushing Pritzker for those rates that you speak of, Bernie,
Pretty much every
and
time
we
he's
haven't
around.
gotten anything.
I don't understand. I understand. I guess the fear of the campaign is if they put a number out there, it's going to be used against them relentlessly. But there are so many ways that one could structure a graduated income tax. You could say, okay, anyone making less than $100,000 a year, their tax rates will go down. I mean, that doesn't seem like it would cost that much because you get most of the benefit in terms of state government revenue.
But he would have to say that, and
he would have to say it, and he just wants to remain vague on it. And so it's basically he's given the Republicans a blank canvas that they can
and
paint their worst fantasies on.
There was one Democrat who put out a bill that had rates at lower levels, and Mr. Representative Martwick. Pritzker has not endorsed that plan and rejected it. It never went anywhere in the legislature, but that's what the Republicans are using to say, oh, look what they'll do to you, when Pritzker says, no, that's not what we'll do to you. But again, blank canvas. I think we'll end on the blank canvas. Anyway, Brian Mackey, Daisy Contreras, thank you very much for joining me in this conversation. I'm Bernie Schoenburg. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Capitol View.